Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Marcus Wolf, and I've been a park ranger in Alaska for 23 years. I've tracked black bears through blizzards, put down grizzlies that got too close to campsites, and pulled lost hikers off mountains in weather that would kill most people. I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. I was wrong. It was October 1967, and I was stationed in the Chugach National Forest, way out in the Copper River Valley. Most folks never heard of the place, but it's about as remote as you can get in Alaska. The nearest town was 200 miles away, and that was just a trading post with a broken radio. I'd been sent to check on a missing research team. 6 geologists had been studying the old copper mines around Kennecott, looking at how the mining waste was affecting the land. They were supposed to check in every 3 days. It had been 8 days since anyone heard from them. The weather was getting bad fast. An early blizzard was coming in, and the temperature had already dropped to 15 below. The wind made it feel like 40 below, and the days were getting so short you only had about 4 hours of real daylight. I'd been having a rough year. My wife left me 6 months earlier, said she was tired of me coming home angry and smelling like whiskey. She wasn't wrong. My son Tommy stopped talking to me after that. He was 16 and thought his old man was a drunk loser. He wasn't wrong about that either. But out here in the wilderness, I was good at my job. I knew how to track, how to survive, how to kill dangerous animals when I had to. I'd put down 12 problem bears over the years, and if I'm being honest, I liked the hunt more than I should have. The thing is, I never believed in any of that Bigfoot nonsense. Tourist garbage, I always said. Something to sell postcards and cheap souvenirs to city folks who thought the woods were full of monsters. The real monsters were the weather, the isolation, and sometimes the people you met out there. I loaded my gear into the snowmobile and headed toward the old mining camp. The researchers had set up near the abandoned buildings where the miners used to live back in the 1922. There'd been a big disaster there in 1923. Cave-in killed 47 workers, and they never got all the bodies out. The company just sealed up the tunnels and left. The ride took 3 hours through snow that was getting deeper every mile. By the time I reached the camp, my face was numb, and my hands were stiff even inside my thick gloves. The wind was howling through the broken buildings like something in pain. That's when I saw the first sign that something was very wrong. The research team's camp was destroyed. Their big canvas tent was shredded, and pieces of it were scattered across the snow like green confetti. Sleeping bags were torn open, and dark stains covered the white ground. In the dim light, it looked black, but I knew it was blood. A lot of blood. I pulled out my rifle and checked the chamber. Whatever had done this might still be around. I'd seen bear attacks before, but this looked different, more violent, more deliberate. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were huge, easily 22 inches long and 8 inches wide, deeper than any bear track I'd ever seen. But the shape was wrong. They looked almost human, but stretched out and with what appeared to be long claw marks at the front. The tracks led away from the destroyed camp toward the old mine entrance. I followed them, keeping my rifle ready. The snow around the prints had a strange reddish color, like rust. At first I thought it was just the copper runoff from the old mines. This whole area was poisoned with metal waste from decades of mining. The streams ran red with copper, and nothing much grew here anymore. But as I got closer to the mine entrance, I realized the red wasn't just in the snow, it was steaming. In 15 below weather, something was making that red stuff warm enough to melt the snow around it. That wasn't natural. That wasn't possible. I stood at the mouth of the mine tunnel, looking into the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. The tracks went straight in, and I could hear something moving around deep inside, something big. Every instinct I had told me to wait for backup, to radio for help, to get the hell out of there, but the nearest help was 200 miles away, and the storm was getting worse. If any of those researchers were still alive, they were running out of time. I checked my rifle one more time and stepped into the tunnel. That was my first mistake. The mine tunnel was like stepping into the belly of a dead animal. The air was thick and stale, with a metallic taste that made me want to spit. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, showing wooden support beams that looked ready to collapse and rusted mining equipment covered in decades of dust. The footprints were clearer in here, pressed into the dirt floor. Whatever made them was heavy. Each print was nearly an inch deep in packed earth. The red steaming liquid was splattered on the walls too, like something bleeding had been running through here fast. I'd been in these old mines before, back when I first started as a ranger. They were dangerous as hell. Cave-ins, poisonous gas, hidden shafts that could drop you 200 feet into darkness. But I'd never seen anything like this. About 50 yards in, I found the first body. Dr. Sarah Chen, according to the ID in her jacket. She'd been the team leader, a geologist from the University of Alaska. What was left of her was barely recognizable. Something had torn her apart with claws, but the wounds were strange. The edges looked burned, like acid had been eating at them. Her research notes were scattered around her body, but I could make out some of the words. Copper contamination worse than expected. Mineral deposits showing unknown properties. Local legends about cursed mines may have basis in fact. That last line made me uncomfortable. I wasn't a superstitious man, but there was something about this place that felt wrong. The silence was too complete. Even in winter, you usually heard something: wind, settling wood, small animals. Here, there was nothing but my own breathing and footsteps. I kept following the tracks deeper into the mine. The tunnel split into 3 branches, but the prints only went down the middle path. That led toward what the old maps called the deep works, the lowest level of the mine where they'd been digging when the cave-in happened in 1923. That's when I heard it. A low sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan. It was coming from somewhere ahead of me, echoing off the tunnel walls. It didn't sound like any animal I knew, and I'd heard every predator in Alaska. I turned off my flashlight and waited for my eyes to adjust. In the total darkness, I could see a faint red glow coming from deeper in the tunnel. It pulsed like a heartbeat. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I'd been in combat in Korea, faced down charging grizzlies, survived blizzards that killed other men, but this was different. This felt like being watched by something that saw me as prey. I turned the flashlight back on and kept moving. Whatever was down here, I was going to find it. 6 people were dead or missing, and it was my job to figure out what happened. The tunnel opened up into a larger chamber, one of the old excavation sites. My light swept across rusted mining carts and broken equipment, and there, in the far corner, I saw movement. Something big shifted in the shadows, something that stood upright like a man but was far too tall and broad. In the split second my light hit it, I saw fur that gleamed like metal and eyes that reflected red like a wolf's. I raised my rifle and fired. The shot was loud, as thunder in the enclosed space. I heard the bullet hit something solid, heard a roar of pain and anger that made my ears ring. But instead of the bright red blood I expected, dark liquid splashed against the rock wall. Black as motor oil. The thing, whatever it was, didn't fall down. It charged straight at me. I've been charged by bears before. A 1,000-pound grizzly moving at full speed is one of the most terrifying things in nature. But this was worse. This thing was bigger, faster, and smart enough to dodge my second shot. I dove to the side as it rushed past me, claws scraping against the tunnel wall and throwing sparks. In the brief moment it was close. I smelled something like burning metal and rotten meat. My rifle jammed. The bolt was stuck, and no amount of working it would free the chamber. I pulled out my sidearm, a .44 revolver that I'd used to finish off wounded animals. 6 shots, and after that I'd have to rely on my knife. The creature circled back, moving through the shadows, just outside my flashlight beam. I could hear its heavy breathing and the scratch of claws on stone. It was playing with me, like a cat with a mouse. That's when I understood something that made my blood turn cold. This thing was intelligent. It wasn't just a predator following instinct. It was thinking, planning, enjoying the hunt. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, keeping the light moving, trying to track its movements. But every time I thought I had it pinned down, it seemed to vanish into the rock itself. Then my flashlight beam caught something that made me forget all about the creature. There were other bodies in the chamber. Lots of them. Some were recent. The rest of the research team, torn apart like Dr. Chen. But others were older. Much older, mummified corpses in rotted clothing that looked like it was from the 1922. The missing miners from the cave-in, they weren't buried. They were arranged in a pile, like trophies. And they weren't alone. There were dozens of other bones, some human, some from animals. All of them gnawed clean and stacked carefully. I was standing in something's larder. That's when it attacked again. The creature came at me from above this time, dropping from somewhere in the darkness near the ceiling. I threw myself backward and fired 3 shots as it landed where I'd been standing. At least one bullet hit. I saw more of that black blood spray across the rocks. But it barely slowed the thing down. Up close, I could see it better. 9 feet tall, covered in fur that had a metallic sheen like copper wire. Its face was almost human but stretched out, with teeth too long and sharp for any natural animal. The worst part was its eyes. They were intelligent and filled with something like amusement. It was enjoying this. I ran. I've never been ashamed of tactical retreats, and this was definitely the time for one. I sprinted back through the tunnel, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I ran. Behind me, I could hear the creature following, but it wasn't rushing. It knew these tunnels better than I did. There was nowhere for me to go. The tunnel seemed longer going back, and I realized why when I reached what should have been the entrance. Instead of open air and snow, I found solid rock. The mine had somehow sealed itself. That was impossible. I'd been in here maybe 20 minutes. Rock doesn't move that fast, not without explosives or heavy equipment. But when I felt along the wall with my hands, it was solid stone, as if the entrance had never existed. I was trapped. I tried to stay calm and think logically. There had to be another way out. These old mines had multiple entrances, emergency exits, connecting tunnels. I just had to find one. But as I explored the tunnels with my dying flashlight, I realized something that made my situation even worse. The mine was bigger than it should be. Way bigger. The maps I'd studied showed a simple layout, 3 main tunnels, maybe a dozen side chambers. What I was seeing now was a maze that went on for miles. Tunnels that curved in directions that shouldn't exist, chambers that opened up into vast spaces my light couldn't reach the end of. And I wasn't alone in here. I kept hearing sounds, footsteps that weren't quite right, breathing that was too deep, voices that whispered in a language I didn't recognize. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of movement in the shadows, but when I turned my light that direction, nothing was there. My compass was spinning wildly, the needle unable to find magnetic north. My watch had stopped at exactly midnight, though I knew it was still afternoon outside. Whatever was affecting this place was messing with anything metal or electronic. I found a defensible position in a small chamber and decided to wait. My flashlight was getting dim, but I had spare batteries. My .44 had 3 rounds left, plus a box of ammunition in my pack. If I was careful with my resources, I might be able to last until someone came looking for me. But deep down, I knew no one was coming. The storm was getting worse, and I was the only ranger assigned to this area. It might be weeks before anyone realized I was missing. That's when I found the journal. It was wedged behind a piece of fallen timber, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. The leather cover was stained and worn, but I could still read the name pressed into it, Thomas Mitchell, mine foreman. The entry started in 1920 and went up to 1923. Most of it was normal stuff, production reports, safety concerns, complaints about the working conditions. But the later entries were different. Asterisk the 15th of March 1923. The men are talking about something they seen in the deep works. Big footprints in the mud, strange sounds at night. I told them it's just bears, but bears don't go that far underground. Asterisk, asterisk, the 22nd of March 1923. Found. Copper ore that don't look right. It's warm to the touch and seems to glow in the dark. Jenkins says it's cursed, but he's always been superstitious. Asterisk. Asterisk, the 3rd of April 1923. 3 men didn't come up from the deep shift last night. Found their equipment scattered around, but no sign of them. Blood on the walls, but it ain't red like it should be. Asterisk, asterisk, the 10th of April 1923. The copper is doing something to the men who work closest to it. They're getting sick, changing somehow. Their skin turns gray and their teeth get sharp. Doctor says It's just mineral poisoning, but I seen what they eat now. Asterisk, asterisk, the 15th of April, 1923. God help us, we dug too deep. We found them, the old ones that lived here before we came. The copper poisoned them, but didn't kill them. They're still alive down there, and now they want to share their gift with us. Asterisk, the last entry was just one line. Asterisk, the cave-in was no accident. We sealed them in, but I don't think it worked. Asterisk, I closed the journal and tried to process what I'd read. If it was true, the mining disaster hadn't been an accident. The workers had deliberately collapsed the tunnels to trap something down here, something that had been living off copper-poisoned water for over 40 years. That's when I cut my hand. I was moving through a narrow tunnel when my palm scraped against a jagged piece of metal, part of an old mining cart. It was just a small cut, barely bleeding, but when my blood hit the metal, it started to steam. Within minutes, the cut had turned black around the edges. Black lines spread up my arm like infection, but they moved too fast for any normal disease. By the time I reached the next chamber, the blackness had reached my elbow, and I was starting to change. My fingernails were getting longer and harder. My teeth felt loose, like they were being pushed out by something bigger growing underneath. When I tried to call for help, my voice came out deeper and rougher than normal. The copper in this place wasn't just poisonous, it was transformative. And I could hear them now, the others who had been changed. They were calling to me in that strange language, welcoming me to join them. Part of me wanted to answer. Part of me was starting to get hungry. Very hungry. I tried to fight the change, but it was like trying to stop a river with my bare hands. The black veins had reached my shoulder and were creeping toward my chest. Every few minutes, I had to spit out bits of my old teeth as new ones pushed through my gums. But the worst part was what it was doing to my mind. I was starting to understand the whispers. The language wasn't human, but somehow I knew what the voices were saying. They were welcoming me home, telling me about the hunger I'd soon feel, the hunt I'd soon join. And I was starting to want it. I found another chamber deeper in the mine, this one filled with natural copper formations. The metal grew out of the walls like infected veins, pulsing, with that same red glow I'd seen before. And there, sitting among the copper growths like some kind of throne, was the biggest of the creatures. It had once been human, I could see that much. But the transformation was complete. 12 feet tall, covered in metallic fur that reflected the red light like a mirror. Its hands were more like claws, and when it smiled at me, I saw teeth like copper knives. "Welcome, brother," it said in perfect English. Its voice was like grinding metal. "I am Thomas Mitchell. I've been waiting for someone like you." The mine foreman from the journal. He'd been down here for over 40 years, changed by the copper into something that wasn't quite human anymore. "The mining brought us close to their resting place," he explained, gesturing to the copper formations around us. "The old ones who lived here before humans came to Alaska. The metal poisoned them, but it also gave them power. Power over stone and metal, power to change others, power to live forever." I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a growl. The change was accelerating. "Don't fight it," Mitchell said. "You feel the hunger, don't you? The need to hunt, to feed? That's natural. We are predators now, Marcus. Better than we ever were as humans." He was right about the hunger. I could smell something delicious somewhere in the mine, something that made my new teeth ache with need. It took me a moment to realize what I was smelling: human flesh. The remaining members of the research team. They were still alive somewhere in these tunnels, and every instinct I had was telling me to find them and feed. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice now completely unrecognizable. Mitchell smiled. "Close. But first, you need to complete the change. Drink." He gestured to a pool of liquid copper that had collected in a depression in the rock. It glowed with inner heat and smelled like metal and blood. I knew I should refuse. Knew this was wrong, that I was losing everything that made me human. But the thirst was overwhelming. I knelt by the pool and drank. The liquid burned going down, but it was the most satisfying thing I'd ever tasted. I could feel it flowing through my body, completing the transformation that had started when I cut my hand. My remaining human teeth fell out, replaced by copper-sharp fangs. My fingernails became claws that could cut through stone, and the hunger became unbearable. "Now," Mitchell said, standing up from his copper throne, Let's hunt. We moved through the tunnels like ghosts, our feet making no sound on the stone floors. I could smell them now, 3 survivors hiding in a chamber maybe half a mile away. Dr. James Peterson, the expedition's geologist. Maria Santos, a graduate student. And Kevin Chen, Sarah's younger brother who had come along as a photographer. They were terrified, hungry, and completely unaware that their rescuer had become their predator. We found them huddled around a small fire they'd managed to build from broken wooden supports. They looked up hopefully when they heard us coming, expecting salvation. "Thank God, Doctor," Peterson said, standing up. "We heard gunshots earlier. Did you find what killed the others?" I looked at him with my new eyes, seeing him not as a person but as prey. The hunger was so strong I could barely think of anything else. "Yeah," I said, my voice now a deep rumble. "I found it." That's when they saw what I'd become. Maria screamed first, a high sound that echoed through the chamber. Kevin fumbled for a camera, some part of his mind still thinking like a photographer even in the face of impossible terror. Doctor Peterson just stood there, his scientific mind trying to process what he was seeing. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "Evolution doesn't work this fast." "Evolution had help," Mitchell said, stepping into the firelight. The 3 survivors pressed back against the chamber wall, but there was nowhere to run. I should have felt guilty. Should have tried to fight the hunger, to protect these innocent people. But all I felt was anticipation. The hunt was about to begin. What happened next isn't something I'm proud of, but it's something I remember with perfect clarity. The hunger took over completely, and I did things that would have horrified the man I used to be. But I wasn't that man anymore. We hunted them through the tunnels for hours, playing with them like cats with mice. The mine had become our territory, and we could phase through the rock walls at will, appearing wherever they tried to hide. Dr. Peterson lasted the longest. He was smart enough to realize that running was useless, so he tried to negotiate instead. Offered us money, recognition in the scientific community, anything we wanted. What we wanted was him. When it was over, I felt satisfied for the first time in months. The constant anger I'd carried since my divorce was gone. The guilt about my drinking, about being a bad father, about enjoying the kill too much, all of it was swept away by a sense of purpose. I was what I was meant to be. Mitchell showed me the rest of our territory that night. Miles of tunnels that connected to every mine in the Copper River Valley. Hidden chambers where others like us slept during the day. Hunting grounds where we could find prey without being discovered. There were 12 of us now, all former humans who had been changed by the copper. Some had been miners from the original disaster. Others were explorers, researchers, even a few other park rangers who had come looking for missing people over the years. We were a pack, and I was the newest member. "The outside world thinks this place is cursed," Mitchell explained as we walked through galleries decorated with human bones. "They avoid it, which makes hunting difficult sometimes. But every few years, someone comes looking for the brass, missing ones, or studying the old mines, or just gets lost in a storm. And then they become like us? The ones who are strong enough? Yes. The others just become food." He gestured to the bone decorations around us. "We've been very patient, Marcus. Very careful. But I think it's time to expand our territory." He was right. The transformation had given me abilities I never imagined. I could move through solid rock like it was water. My strength was enough to tear through steel. My senses were so sharp I could track a mouse through a blizzard. And I was still getting stronger. We made our first raid on the outside world 2 weeks later. A research station about 50 miles south, studying climate change in the Arctic. 8 people working in a remote location with no radio contact for days at a time. Perfect hunting. I led the attack, my ranger knowledge helping us approach without being detected. We killed 7 of them and brought the 8th back to the mines for transformation. Dr. Amanda Foster, a climatologist who now hunts with us in the deep tunnels. After that, we got Boulder, a native village that had stood for hundreds of years, wiped out in a single night. A group of hunters who came looking for trophy bears. A helicopter crew whose aircraft went down in a freak storm that we had caused by disrupting their navigation equipment. The death count kept rising, but no one connected the disappearances. Alaska is a dangerous place, and people go missing all the time. Bears, weather, accidents, plenty of explanations that don't involve impossible creatures living in abandoned mines. But we're getting hungry for bigger prey now. Cities, towns, places with enough people to really satisfy the pack's growing appetite. I still remember being human sometimes, especially when I find personal items among the belongings of our prey. A family photo, a letter from home, a child's drawing. For just a moment, I remember what it felt like to care about those things. Then the hunger comes back, and I remember what I am now. My name is Marcus Wolf, and I used to protect people from the dangers of the wilderness. Now I am one of those dangers. I'm something that shouldn't exist, hunting in places that should be empty. The copper mines of the Chugach National Forest are still there, still marked as dangerous on all the official maps. The government sealed most of the entrances years ago, but they can't seal them all. And we don't need the entrances anyway. If you ever find yourself in that part of Alaska, if you see strange tracks in the snow or hear whispers in a language you don't recognize, if you notice that the streams run red even in winter, turn around and leave. Don't investigate, don't try to help, don't be a hero, because we're always hungry and we're always hunting, and once you've seen us, you can never really leave. The copper makes sure of that. My name is Catherine Bloodmoon, and I wish I could forget what happened during the worst winter of my life. I've been a park ranger for 9 years now, working the brutal northern territories of Alaska's gates of the Arctic. People think it's crazy that someone like me chose this job, a woman alone in one of the harshest places on Earth, but I love it. The silence, the endless, white, the way nature strips everything down to what really matters. Survival. I'm good at what I do, real good. I've pulled people out of avalanches, found lost hikers in blizzards that would kill most folks in hours, and taught survival classes to military types who thought they were tough. My specialty is extreme weather rescue. When the temperature drops to where your breath freezes before it leaves your mouth, that's when they call me. The scars on my hands tell stories. Frostbite from when I stayed out too long searching for a missing family 3 winters back. Found them too, alive and grateful. That's what keeps me going, knowing that my skills mean people go home to their families. I've always been different from other rangers. Most of them hunt. It's practical up here, they say. Fresh meat, natural way of life. But I can't do it. Haven't eaten meat since I was 12 and saw my dad gut his first deer. Something about taking a life, even for food, just feels wrong to me. My fellow rangers tease me about it, but they respect it too. Catherine the vegetarian, they call me. Weird, but tough. February 1984 was shaping up to be a monster. The old Inupiat elders in the villages were shaking their heads, talking about bad spirits in the wind. Temperatures had been sitting at 60 below for almost 2 weeks straight. That's cold enough to kill you in minutes without proper gear. Cold enough to freeze diesel fuel solid. Cold enough to make the very air hurt your lungs. I was stationed at our remote outpost near Anaktuvuk Pass with a mixed group, 4 rangers, including myself, 3 university researchers studying Arctic wildlife, 2 native guides, and 2 support staff. 11 people total, tucked into a cluster of insulated buildings, 400 miles from the nearest real town. The plan was simple. Ride out the cold snap, help the researchers with their work, and wait for the supply helicopter that came every 3 weeks. We had plenty of food, good equipment, and enough fuel to keep the generators running. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. It started on a Tuesday morning when Jake Morrison, our lead ranger, found the main food storage building's heating system had failed. The backup generator that was supposed to keep our supplies from freezing had broken down sometime during the night. When we opened the storage room, we found our nightmare. Every can of food had burst from the cold. 3 weeks of supplies for 11 people, ruined, frozen, solid, and inedible. "How much food do we have left?" asked Dr. Sandra Chen, the lead researcher. She was a small woman from Berkeley who studied Arctic fox behavior, smart as hell but not exactly built for this kind of crisis. I did the math in my head. Emergency rations for maybe 4 days if we stretch them. The supply helicopter isn't due for another 3 weeks. "Can't we radio for an emergency pickup?" asked Tommy Clearwater, one of our Inupiat guides. Tommy was in his 50s. Knew these mountains better than anyone. Jake shook his head. Radio's been down since yesterday. This storm is blocking everything. The wind outside howled like something alive and angry. Through the thick windows, I could see snow whipping horizontally across the ground. The weather reports before we lost contact had been grim. This storm system was massive, covering most of northern Alaska. Even if rescue teams knew we were in trouble, no helicopter could fly in this. "So what do we do?" asked Frank Kowalski, our maintenance guy. Frank was a big man, maybe 45, with thick hands and a practical way of looking at problems. "We can't last 3 weeks on 4 days of food." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to say it. "We'll figure something out," I said finally. "I've survived worse than this." But even as I said it, I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I'd never actually been in a situation this bad. None of us had. That night, as the wind screamed around our buildings and the temperature gauge read -62, I lay awake thinking about survival, about how long a person could go without food, about what people do when all their civilized options run out. I thought about the old stories Tommy had told us around the fire on better nights. Stories about the Wendigo. Creatures born from cannibalism and endless hunger. Just old tales, I'd always said. Starvation makes people crazy, that's all. Makes them see things that aren't there. But lying there in the dark, listening to the storm rage like something trying to get in, those old stories didn't feel so impossible anymore. By the third day, the hunger was getting real. We'd stretched our emergency rations as far as possible, but 11 people eating nothing but energy bars and instant soup can only last so long. The storm outside hadn't let up for a second. If anything, it was getting worse. The wind sounded different now, like voices calling to each other in a language I didn't recognize. "Doctor." Chen was the first to bring up what we were all thinking. "We need to discuss our options," she said during our evening meeting. We'd gathered in the main building's common room, huddled around the wood stove that was working overtime to keep us warm. "Realistically, how long can we survive on what we have left?" "Maybe 2 more days," said Jake. 3 if we go down to 1 meal a day." "And the storm?" "Radio's still dead. No way to know when it'll break." Jake's face was grim in the firelight. "But looking at the sky, I'd say we've got at least another week of this, probably more." The math was simple and terrible. We were going to run out of food long before we could get rescued. "There are other options," said Frank quietly. He was staring into the fire, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Things people do when they have to survive." "What kind of things?" asked Dr. Martin Webb, the older researcher. Martin was maybe 60, studying climate patterns. Smart man, but he looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. Frank finally looked up. "You know what kind of things?" The silence that followed was thick and ugly. Everyone knew what he meant, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. "No," I said firmly. "We're not having that conversation. We'll figure something else out." "Like what?" Frank's voice was getting sharper. "There's no game out there, Catherine. Everything with sense has migrated south or is hibernating. We've got no food, no way out, and no rescue coming. What exactly do you think we're going to figure out?" "I don't know," I snapped back. "But we're not doing that." "Doing what?" Frank stood up, his face angry. "Surviving? Because that's what this is about now. Survival. There has to be another way. Tell me what it is then. Tell me your magical solution." I couldn't. That was the horrible truth. I had no answer. 9 years as a survival expert, and I was completely out of ideas. That's when Dr. Webb made the decision that doomed us all. He keeled over right there in the common room, clutching his chest. Heart attack, brought on by the cold and stress and his age. Jake and I worked on him for 20 minutes, but we all knew it was hopeless. The man was gone. We wrapped his body in tarps and put it in the unheated storage shed, where it would freeze solid and keep. The group stood around his covered form in the growing darkness, and I could see the calculation in everyone's eyes. Webb weighed maybe 160. That was food. That was survival. "No," I said before anyone could speak. "Whatever you're thinking, no." "Catherine," Jake said softly, "he's dead. We can't change that, but we can use his. We can survive." "I won't be part of it." "Then don't be," said Frank. But don't try to stop us either. I wanted to fight them, wanted to physically stand between them and Webb's body, but what could I do? There were 10 of them and 1 of me, and they were right about the math. We were going to die without food, so I walked away. Went to my quarters and locked the door, and tried to pretend I couldn't hear what was happening in the common room that night. The smell started the next morning, sweet and sick, like nothing I'd ever smelled before. When I finally forced myself to go to the common room for water, I found them all sitting around, looking different, satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn. "There's some for you," said Jake quietly. "We saved you some." I looked at the plate he was holding out and felt bile rise in my throat. "I can't. You have to. It's the only way. I'd rather die." And at the time, I meant it. That was my mistake. I should have taken the food. Should have compromised my principles for the sake of survival. Because that night, while I lay in my bunk growing weaker from hunger, something took Frank. We found pieces of him the next morning, scattered around the supply shed where we'd stored Webb's remains. But not normal pieces, torn and partially eaten, like some massive predator had gotten to him. The weird thing was, there were no tracks in the snow around the building, no sign of how anything could have gotten in or out, and Webb's body was gone entirely. Just vanished. "Must have been a polar bear," said Jake, but his voice was shaky, somehow got into the shed. "Where are the tracks then?" asked Tommy. The old guide was staring at the blood-stained snow with fear in his eyes. "And how did it get out with a full-grown man's body without leaving any sign?" Nobody had an answer for that. But that afternoon, while I was trying to repair the radio, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice calling from outside, muffled by the wind and snow. "Help me," it said. "Please, someone help me." It was Frank's voice. I stood at the radio, my hands shaking as Frank's voice called out again from somewhere in the storm. "Catherine, help me. I'm hurt. I'm so cold." It was definitely his voice. I'd worked with Frank for 3 years, knew every tone and inflection. But I'd seen his torn-apart body that morning, seen the blood and bone scattered across the snow like a predator's leftovers. "Did you hear that?" I called out to the common room. Jake appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Hear what?" "Frank. He's calling for help." Jake listened for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't hear anything but wind." But the voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, Catherine, I know you can hear me. I'm trapped out here. I'm so hungry." That last word, hungry, was drawn out in a way that made my skin crawl. Like Frank was tasting the word, savoring it. "You really don't hear it?" I asked Jake. "There's nothing there." He was looking at me with concern now. "When's the last time you ate something? Real food?" The answer was 4 days ago, before our supplies got ruined. I'd been living on melted snow and the few crackers I'd found in my emergency pack. My body was starting to eat itself. And maybe my mind was going too. "I need to check outside," I said. "Absolutely not. It's -60 out there and getting dark. Whatever you think you're hearing, it's not real." But even as he said it, we both heard something else. A scratching sound against the Pute outer wall. Long, deliberate scrapes, like claws or fingernails dragging across the metal siding. Jake's face went white. "Okay, I heard that one." The scratching moved along the wall, slowly, like something was circling the building. In the dying light outside, I caught a glimpse of movement through the frosted window, something tall and thin passing by. "Get the others," I whispered. Within minutes, everyone was in the common room, armed with whatever we could find: axes, knives, a hunting rifle that Jake kept for emergencies. The scratching had stopped, but we all knew something was out there. "Could be a bear," said Tommy, but he didn't sound convinced. "Polar bears get aggressive when they're hungry." "Bears don't scratch like that," said Dr. Chen. That sounded almost deliberate. That's when the lights went out. The generator had been running fine, but suddenly we were plunged into complete darkness. Someone screamed. I think it was Dr. Chen. Jake was fumbling for his flashlight when we heard the front door creak open. "Who opened the door?" Jake's voice was tight with fear. "Nobody," came the chorus of responses. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the open doorway. Snow was blowing in, but there was something else, footprints in the fresh powder. Huge footprints, easily twice the size of a normal human's. And they led from outside to right where we were standing. "Whatever it is, it's inside," I whispered. That's when we heard Tommy scream from the kitchen. We rushed in to find him backed against the wall, staring up at something in the corner where the ceiling met the walls. The flashlight beam followed his terrified gaze, and I saw something that made my mind rebel. It was Frank. Or what had been Frank. He was crouched in the corner about 8 feet off the ground, somehow clinging to the walls like a spider. But he was wrong. Stretched out, elongated, his limbs too long, and his face too thin. His mouth was open in a grin that showed too many teeth, all sharp and yellowed. "I'm so hungry," he said in that voice I'd heard outside. "So very, very hungry." Then he dropped down among us. What followed was chaos. People screaming, running, the sound of furniture crashing. Jake got off one shot with the rifle before Frank, or the thing that had been Frank, moved faster than anything human should be able to move. There was a wet tearing sound, and Jake's screams cut off abruptly. I ran. Pure instinct. Grabbed a flashlight and bolted for my quarters, slamming the door behind me and turning every lock I could find. Outside, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, of people dying, of something feeding. When it finally got quiet, I waited until dawn before coming out. The common room looked like a slaughterhouse. Jake was dead, torn open, just like Frank had been. Dr. Chen was gone entirely. No body, just blood smeared across the floor in a trail, leading to the broken window. Tommy and one of the support staff, a guy named Rick, were missing too. Of the 11 people who'd been trapped here a week ago, only 5 remained. Myself, Dr. Webb's research assistant Lisa, our cook Maria, the other guide Sam, and Dr. Martin's son David, who'd come along to help with equipment. What the hell happened here? "What?" Lisa asked, staring at Jake's remains. I told them about Frank, about what I'd seen in the kitchen. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "People don't cling to walls, Catherine," said Sam. "That's impossible." "Then explain this." I gestured at the destruction around us. "Bears," said David. "Has to be bears. They broke in, and bears don't take bodies and leave no tracks," I shot back. "Bears don't call your name in your friend's voice." But I could see in their eyes that they didn't believe me. They thought the hunger was making me hallucinate, making me see monsters where there were only wild animals. That afternoon, Maria went missing while gathering firewood from the shed. We found her coat hanging from a tree branch 20 feet in the air, but no other sign of her. No tracks. No blood. Nothing. That night, we heard them calling to us. All of them. Frank, Jake, Tommy, Chen, Rick, Maria. Their voices carried on the wind, begging us to come outside, telling us they were cold and hurt and needed help. "It's not them," I kept saying. "Whatever's out there, it's not them." But Lisa was crying. "That's Maria's voice. I know her voice. Maria's dead. They're all dead. How can you be so sure?" I couldn't explain it. Couldn't make them understand that what was calling to us had never been human, or had stopped being human the moment it took its first bite of Dr. Webb's frozen corpse. All I knew was that if we went outside, we'd join the voices in the dark. By the 4th night after Frank's transformation, only David and I were left alive. Sam had gone out to answer Lisa's voice, calling for help. We'd found pieces of him the next morning. Lisa had simply vanished from her locked room sometime during the night, leaving only a window open to the screaming wind. "We're going to die here," David said. He was young, maybe 25, and the constant terror had aged him years in just days. "Whatever's out there, it's going to pick us off one by one." I wanted to disagree, but I couldn't. The things outside were patient. They could wait. They had all the time in the world, and we were getting weaker every day. "There has to be a way to fight them," I said. "How do you fight something like that? How do you kill something that's already dead?" I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to just sit here and wait to die. On the 7th night since Frank's transformation, I discovered the truth about what was hunting us. David had been acting strange all day. Jumpy, paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder. I'd attributed it to stress and hunger, but when I caught him staring at me with an odd expression while I slept, I started to wonder. You okay, David? I asked. Fine, he said, but his voice was different, flatter, like he was concentrating on making it sound normal. Just hungry, so very hungry. The way he said hungry made my blood freeze. I'd heard that exact tone before. David, when did you last eat? Eat? He laughed, and it wasn't his laugh. Oh, Catherine, sweet, stubborn Catherine, I've been eating just fine. That's when I noticed the smell on his breath. Sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. What did you eat, David? His smile was wrong, too wide, showing teeth that looked sharper than they should be. You know what I ate. Same thing the others ate. Same thing you refused to eat. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You've been, all of you, from the beginning. Not all of us. You never partook. That's why you could see what we really were. That's why you could hear us calling. He stood up slowly, and I noticed he seemed taller than before. Thinner. The hunger changes you, Catherine. Makes you into something better, something that never has to go hungry again. Dr. Webb, delicious. We finished him off that first night, remember? But it wasn't enough. It's never enough. The more you eat, the hungrier you get. He took a step toward me. Frank found that out when he went looking for more in the storage shed. The hunger took him completely that night, made him into something magnificent. I backed toward the door, but David moved to block my path with inhuman speed. The others weren't as strong as Frank. They fought the change, tried to hold on to their humanity. That's why they were so easy to pick off. They were caught between human and Wendigo, weak in both forms. His face was elongating as I watched, cheekbones becoming more prominent, eyes sinking back into deep hollows. But I embraced it. I let the hunger fill me up and make me strong. This is impossible, I whispered. You've seen the impossible for days now, Catherine. You just didn't want to believe it. He was definitely taller now, had to be pushing 7 feet. His fingers ended in black claws that clicked against each other as he flexed them. The old stories Tommy used to tell, they weren't stories. The Wendigo is real, and it's born from cannibalism and desperate hunger. But why me? Why am I still alive? Because you're special. His voice was becoming deeper, more resonant, like it was echoing from somewhere deep in his chest. You never ate the forbidden flesh. You stayed pure. Do you know how rare that is? How delicious pure flesh tastes after weeks of corrupted meat? I ran, bolted for the door and slammed it behind me, but I could hear him laughing as he gave chase. His footsteps were too heavy now, each one shaking the building's frame. The storm outside had finally broken, leaving behind a crystalline night under a full moon. The snow reflected the moonlight like mirrors, turning the landscape into something beautiful and deadly. I could see my breath in silver puffs as I struggled through the deep drifts, making for the emergency supply cache we kept half a mile from the main buildings. Behind me, something burst through the wall of the building. Not the door, the actual wall, sending splinters of wood flying. David had completed his transformation into something that barely looked human anymore. He was easily 12 feet tall now, skeletal thin but radiating a terrible strength. His face had stretched into something wolf-like, with a muzzle full of needle-sharp teeth. You can't run forever, Catherine. His voice boomed across the snow. I can smell your fear. I can hear your heart beating. I'd made it maybe a quarter mile when I stumbled and fell face first into the snow. When I rolled over, he was standing right above me, grinning down with that horrible mouth. I'm going to eat you slowly, he said, saliva dripping from his fangs. Going to make it last for hours. Pure flesh deserves to be savored. That's when I saw the emergency flare gun in the snow beside me, dropped from my jacket when I fell. My frozen fingers could barely work the mechanism, but I managed to point it at his face and pull the trigger. The flare hit him right in the chest, and he screamed like nothing I'd ever heard. The phosphorus burned white-hot against his flesh, and wherever it touched, his skin cracked and blackened. He stumbled backward, clawing at the burning chemical, and I realized something crucial. Fire. The one thing these creatures feared was fire. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the emergency cache, David's agonized howls echoing behind me. The cache contained survival gear, including more flares, a blowtorch for melting ice, and several cans of emergency fuel. By the time David recovered enough to follow me, I was ready. He came charging through the trees like a freight train, but I was waiting with the blowtorch. The flame caught him across the face, and he reeled back, shrieking. "You can't kill me," he roared. "We're beyond death now. We're eternal." "Maybe," I said, lighting another flare. "But you still burn." What followed was the longest fight of my life. David was impossibly strong and fast, but the fire kept him at bay. Every time he tried to close in, I drove him back with flames. The blowtorch fuel ran out first, then the flares, one by one, until I was down to my last emergency candle. "You're out of fire," David snarled, circling me like a predator. His flesh was burned and blackened, but he was still moving, still hunting. "Now you die." He lunged, and I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the can of emergency fuel and poured it over both of us, then touched the tiny candle flame to the liquid. We both went up like torches. The pain was indescribable, like being turned inside out while every nerve ending screamed at once. But while I was merely burning, David was being destroyed. The Wendigo curse that had transformed him couldn't survive the purifying flames. He collapsed into ash and bone, his final scream echoing across the empty wilderness. I rolled in the snow until the flames went out, leaving me burned but alive. Most of my hair was gone, and my hands and face would carry scars for the rest of my life. But I had won. Or so I thought. The rescue team found me 3 days later, half dead from cold and burns, mumbling about monsters and cannibalism. They figured I was delirious from trauma and exposure, the sole survivor of a terrible accident that had claimed 10 lives. I tried to tell them the truth, tried to explain about the Wendigo, about what happens when people eat human flesh in the deep cold. They nodded politely and made notes about psychological trauma and survivor's guilt. The official report blamed the deaths on equipment failure, exposure, and possible predation by Arctic wildlife. The scattered remains they found were attributed to scavengers. No mention of anything supernatural, no acknowledgement that something ancient and hungry had been awakened by desperate people making terrible choices. I spent 2 months in a hospital in Anchorage, getting skin grafts and psychiatric evaluation. The doctors said I was suffering from severe PTSD and hallucinations brought on by starvation and isolation. They gave me medications and therapy and told me I was lucky to be alive. But they were wrong about one thing. I wasn't lucky. Because that night, when I poured the fuel over both David and myself, when we both went up in flames, I didn't just burn him, I burned myself too. And in that moment of agony and fire, something changed inside me. Some line was crossed that I can never uncross. The hunger started small, just a craving for rare meat, for something more substantial than the vegetarian diet I'd maintained my whole adult life. The hospital cafeteria's hamburgers tasted better than anything I'd ever eaten. Then steaks. Then things I won't name. I told myself it was just recovery. That my body needed protein after what I'd been through. That the cravings would fade once I got healthy again. They didn't fade. They got stronger. I left the hospital service and moved to a cabin outside Fairbanks, telling everyone I needed time to heal. But the truth was darker. I was changing, just like the others had changed. The fire had burned away David's Wendigo curse, but it had also transferred something to me. Some seed of that endless hunger. I fought it for months, tried to go back to my vegetarian ways, tried to convince myself that I was still human, still pure. But late at night, when the aurora painted the sky green and the temperature dropped to depths that would kill normal people, I could hear them calling. Frank's voice, David's voice, all the others who had tasted forbidden flesh and been transformed. They were still out there in the deep places, hunting and feeding, and they were calling me to join them. The worst part is that I want to answer. I can feel the change accelerating now, especially during the winter months. My bones are getting longer, my appetite growing beyond what any human should need. I catch myself staring at people sometimes, imagining how they might taste. The scars from my burns have faded into pale lines that look almost like ritual markings. I've tried moving south, thinking warmer climates might stop the transformation, but the Wendigo curse isn't about cold, it's about hunger. Endless, consuming hunger that can never be satisfied by ordinary food. So I came back north, to the places where it all began. I bought supplies and hiked back into the deep wilderness, telling myself I was going to end this, going to find a way, to break the curse or die trying. But deep down, I know the truth. I'm not here to break anything. I'm here to finish becoming what I was always meant to become. The hunger moon is rising again, and I can feel my humanity slipping away like snow in a warm wind. Soon, I'll be 12 feet tall and skeletal thin, with claws like black knives and teeth like broken glass. Soon, I'll be hunting through these mountains, calling to lost travelers and voices they trust, leading them to places where their screams can't be heard. And maybe, if I'm lucky, some other stubborn vegetarian ranger will try to resist, will think they can maintain their principles even when faced with impossible choices, will believe that fire can purify what has been corrupted. I'll save them for last. Pure flesh, after all, deserves to be savored. The hunger moon is calling, and Catherine Blood Moon is ready to answer. If you're reading this, stay away from the northern ranges during winter. Stay away from voices calling for help in the dark. And whatever you do, no matter how hungry you get, no matter how desperate things become, never taste the forbidden flesh, because some hungers can never be satisfied, and some transformations can never be undone. My name is Rebecca Ironheart, and I've spent 17 years pulling people out of places they shouldn't have gone. Caves, mostly. Dark holes in the earth where folks get lost, hurt, or worse. I'm what they call a cave rescue specialist for Glacier Bay National Park in southeast Alaska. It's dangerous work, but I'm good at it. Maybe too good. People always ask why I do this job. Why I crawl into spaces so tight you can barely breathe, or rappel down into black pits that seem to go on forever. The truth is, it beats going home. My husband's got fists like hammers and a temper that gets worse every year. The divorce papers are sitting on my kitchen table, but I keep finding reasons not to serve them. Coward, I guess. December in Alaska is brutal. The ice storms had been going for 3 days straight when the call came in. 5 experienced cavers had gone missing in the Bone Church system. That's what the locals call it. Real name is Cathedral Cave, but everyone knows about the old Russian monastery built right on top of it back in the 1800s. The monks used to bury their dead down there. Made the whole place into some kind of underground cemetery decorated with skulls and bones. Creepy as hell. But I don't believe in ghosts. I've been in scary situations before. Pulled 3 teenagers out of a flooded mine shaft in pitch darkness. Found a hiker who'd been trapped for 6 days with a broken leg in a cave so narrow we had to break his femur again to get him out. This was just another job. The missing team was led by Dr. Sarah Chen, a geology professor from University of Alaska. Good people, smart people. They'd been mapping the lower levels that opened up after the big earthquake last month. New passages, new dangers. The kind of place that could swallow you whole if you weren't careful. I loaded my gear into the truck, ropes, harnesses, headlamps, emergency food, medical supplies. The burn scars on my left arm ached in the cold. Got those in a mine. Fire when I was 22. Back when I thought coal mining was my calling. Learned different real quick. The drive to Cathedral Cave took 2 hours through wind that could knock you sideways. Ice covered everything like glass armor. The monastery ruins stood black against the white sky, all broken walls and empty windows. Gave me the shivers, but not because of any supernatural nonsense. Old buildings in Alaska have a way of feeling hungry. The main cave entrance was a crack in the rock about 4 feet wide. Ice had sealed most of it, but I could see where Chen's team had melted their way through. They'd been down there 4 days now. That was 3 days too long. I suited up, thermal underwear, cave suit, helmet with dual LED arrays, emergency beacon. My climbing harness felt familiar around my waist, like an old friend. I'd done this dance 1,000 times. Go down, find the lost sheep, bring them home. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The moment I entered the cave, my breath came out in white puffs that disappeared into the darkness ahead. The limestone walls were covered in a thin layer of ice that made everything sparkle in my headlamp beam. Beautiful and deadly, ice makes every surface slippery, every handhold uncertain. 50 feet down, I found their first camp. Sleeping bags still laid out, cookstove cold but recently used. Food scattered around like they'd left in a hurry. But no sign of violence. No blood. Just an empty camp that felt wrong somehow. I called out, voice echoing into the depths. Dr. Chen, this is Rebecca with Park Rescue. Nothing came back but my own echo, distorted and strange. That's when I noticed the smell. Sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. In December, in a cave where it never got above freezing, I should have turned around right there. The cave system went down in stages, like a giant staircase carved from living rock. Each level had chambers big enough to hold a house, connected by passages that squeezed tight enough to test your nerve. Chen's team had left trail markers, little reflective tags that caught my light and showed the way forward. 200 feet down, I found something that made me stop cold. Their equipment was scattered across a chamber the size of a school gymnasium. But it wasn't just dropped or abandoned, it was destroyed. Helmets crushed like eggshells, climbing ropes cut into pieces, backpacks torn open with contents spilled everywhere. And covering it all was this thick, sticky slime that smelled like rotting fish. I knelt down next to what used to be Dr. Chen's pack. The fabric was shredded, but not cut. It looked like something with claws had gone at it. Big claws. I found her notebook, pages stuck together with that same awful slime. Most of it was unreadable, but I could make out a few words on the last entry. Not natural. Something watching. Going deeper. My radio crackled with static. I tried, calling base camp, but the signal wouldn't reach through all that rock. Standard procedure was to mark my position and head back for backup, but 5 people were down here somewhere. Maybe hurt, maybe dying. I couldn't just leave. The trail markers led deeper, past chambers filled with strange rock formations that looked almost like furniture. The limestone had been carved and shaped, not by water but by human hands. This wasn't just a cave system, it was the monastery's underground burial complex. That's when I found the bone church. The chamber opened up so wide my headlamp couldn't find the walls, but I could see what filled it. Thousands of human skulls arranged in neat rows along ledges cut into the rock. Femurs and rib cages stacked like cordwood. An altar made entirely of human bones sat in the center, with a wooden cross that had somehow survived 2 centuries in this damp darkness. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. The monks had turned death into art, arranged the bones of their brothers into patterns that caught and reflected my light in strange ways. But there was something wrong with the display. Some of the bones were cleaner than others. Newer. I walked closer to the altar, boots crunching on small bones scattered across the floor. That's when I saw it. A human skull that still had bits of flesh attached. Fresh blood stained the rock beneath it. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it echo in the chamber. This wasn't ancient history. Someone had died here recently. Maybe Dr. Chen's team. Maybe today. I spun around, sweeping my light across the bone-covered walls. That's when I saw the claw marks. Long gouges in the solid limestone, too big to be from any animal that lived in Alaska. The marks were fresh. Chips of white stone still lay scattered below them. A sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the cave system, low and deep, like a growl mixed with human speech. It seemed to come from everywhere, at once, bouncing off the walls until I couldn't tell which direction it originated from. I drew my emergency flare gun and called out again. "Hello, Park Service Rescue. If anyone can hear me, make noise." The growling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. Then the temperature dropped. Dropped fast and hard, like someone had opened a door to the Arctic. My breath went from visible puffs to white clouds that hung in the air like fog. Ice began forming on the bones around me, crackling as it spread. That's when I saw the eyes, 2 points of yellow light reflecting my headlamp from the darkness beyond the altar. Too high up to be human, too wide set to be any normal animal. They watched me for maybe 10 seconds, then vanished. I was alone in a bone church 200 feet underground, with something big and hungry sharing the darkness. I should have run. Any sane person would have run. But my daddy always said I had more guts than brains, and 17 years of rescue work had taught me that running from danger usually just meant someone else would die. I checked my equipment, flare gun loaded, rope secure, backup lights working. Whatever was down here, I was going to find it, and if Dr. Chen's team was still alive, I was going to bring them home. The deeper passages led down at a steep angle, carved smooth by centuries of underground water. My boots slipped on ice-covered rock, and more than once I had to use my climbing axes to keep from sliding into the black depths below. The walls began to change. Instead of natural limestone, I was seeing carved stone blocks fitted together with the skill of master builders. The monks hadn't just used natural caves, they'd expanded them, shaped them, turned them into something that belonged in nightmares. Fresh claw marks scarred every surface, and that sickly sweet smell was getting stronger. Somewhere ahead, something big was waiting for me. I clicked off my headlamp and listened. In the absolute darkness, I could hear it breathing. Slow, deep breaths that echoed like wind through a tunnel. And underneath that sound, something that might have been whispering. Human voices speaking words I couldn't understand. When I clicked my light back on, the yellow eyes were watching me again. Much closer this time. The creature moved like liquid shadow, there 1 second and gone the next. But it left tracks in the soft cave mud, prints bigger than dinner plates, with claw marks that cut deep into the stone beneath. Whatever it was massive, and it could move through these caves like it owned them. I followed the tracks deeper, past chambers filled with human bones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. Skulls stacked in spirals that seemed to turn even when I wasn't looking directly at them. Rib cages wired together into cage-like structures that cast twisted shadows on the walls. The monks had been busy down here. Too busy. In the 5th chamber, I found Dr. Martinez from Chen's team. What was left of him, anyway. He'd been arranged like the ancient bones, positioned sitting against the far wall with his arms crossed and his eyes closed. But his body told a different story. His chest had been opened with surgical precision. Ribs spread wide to expose the empty cavity within. His heart was gone, along with other organs I couldn't identify in the red mess. But the worst part was his face. Peaceful. Like he'd died in his sleep instead of being torn apart by something with claws like butcher knives. I forced myself to examine the scene like a professional. No defensive wounds on his hands, no sign he'd tried to run or fight. Whatever had killed him, he'd either been unconscious when it happened or hadn't seen it coming. The creature's tracks circled the body in a wide spiral, like it had been deciding what to do with him, or maybe like it had been performing some kind of ritual. My radio crackled again, and for a second I thought I heard voices. But when I tried to respond, only static came through. The interference was getting worse the deeper I went. I marked Martinez's location and kept moving. 4 people still missing, and the tracks led on into darkness that seemed to swallow my light. The next chamber made my breath catch in my throat. It was full of recent kills. Bodies hung from the ceiling on ropes made of braided human hair, swaying gently in the underground breeze. Some I recognized from the missing team, Dr. Chen, her graduate student Tommy, the photographer they'd brought along. Others looked older, maybe other cavers who'd gotten lost over the years. They'd all been opened the same way as Martinez, emptied out and arranged like some kind of sick artwork. Their blood had been used to paint symbols on the walls, spirals and crosses and shapes that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. But they weren't all dead. Tommy was still breathing, hanging upside down about 15 feet up. His eyes tracked my movement when I entered the chamber, and his lips moved like he was trying to speak. I got my climbing gear out and started rigging a rope to reach him. That's when I heard it again. That deep growling that seemed to come from the rock itself. But this time I could make out words mixed in with the animal sounds. Fresh meat? It said in a voice like gravel sliding down a cliff. Warm blood. Living heart. I spun around, flare gun ready, but the chamber was empty, except for the hanging bodies and me. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the cave itself was speaking. Who are you? I called out. What do you want? Laughter echoed from the darkness. Not human laughter, something deeper and hungrier. Want? It said. Want to feed, want to add to collection. Pretty bones, strong bones. That's when I saw it moving in the shadows near the ceiling, not walking or climbing, but flowing through the solid rock like it was made of water. Just glimpses. A massive paw here, a flash of yellow fangs there. It was using the cave itself as camouflage, becoming part of the stone and shadow. Tommy made a choking sound above me. I had to get him down, had to get us both out of here before that thing decided to stop playing with its food. I fired a flare into the air, filling the chamber with red light and harsh chemical smoke. For just a moment, I saw it clearly. 15 feet tall and covered in thick black fur, but standing upright like a man. Its face was somewhere between bear and human, with intelligent yellow eyes and a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing meat. But the worst part was its hide. Human skulls had been embedded in its flesh, growing out of its back and shoulders like armor. Some of the skulls still had hair attached, and a few still moved their jaws like they were trying to speak. It roared when the flare light hit it, a sound that made the chamber walls shake and dust rain from the ceiling. Then it melted back into the stone, disappearing like it had never been there. I got Tommy cut down and tried to carry him out, but he was too far gone. Blood loss and shock had done their work. He died in my arms, whispering about something that called itself the Guardian, something that had been sleeping in the deep caves until the earthquake woke it up. "It knows you're here," he said with his last breath. "It's been hurting you deeper. This is what it wants." The flare burned out, leaving me alone in the dark with a dead graduate student and the sound of claws scraping against stone somewhere in the black above my head. I left Tommy with the others and ran. Not retreat, I'm not built for retreat, but tactical repositioning to somewhere I could make a stand. The creature was smart, smarter than any animal had a right to be. It was hurting me, like Tommy said, driving me deeper into its domain, where it had all the advantages. But I knew caves. I'd spent 17 years learning their secrets, understanding their dangers. If this thing wanted to dance, I was going to choose the music. I made it 3 chambers back before it cut me off. The passage ahead was blocked with human bones, not ancient monastery remains, but fresh skeletons still held together with dried ligaments. They'd been woven into a barrier that completely sealed the tunnel, and I could hear that deep growling coming from the spaces between the ribs and skulls. Behind me, claws clicked against stone as the creature dropped from the ceiling to block my retreat. I was trapped 250 feet underground with something that collected human bones like trophies and could move through solid rock like it was air. Time to see what 17 years of cave rescue had taught me about impossible situations. I turned around slowly, flare gun in one hand and climbing axe in the other. The creature stood blocking the passage I'd come from, close enough that I could smell the death on its breath. Up close, it was even more horrible than I'd imagined. The human skulls weren't just embedded in its hide, they were alive somehow, eyes rolling in empty sockets, jaws working silently. Some still had scraps of hair and flesh attached, and I recognized Dr. Chen's face staring at me from the creature's left shoulder. Her mouth moved like she was trying to warn me, but no sound came out. "Guardian of the sacred dead," it spoke, and Chen's skull moved its lips in sync with the words. "Keeper of the Bone Church, punisher of those who disturb the eternal rest." I kept my voice steady, the way you do when talking to a dangerous animal. "I'm not here to disturb anything. I'm looking for my people. Let me take them and leave." It laughed again, that grinding sound like stones being crushed. "Your people are here forever. Part of the collection now. Part of me." It touched one of the skulls growing from its chest, and I heard Tommy's voice say, "Help us, Rebecca, please." That's when I understood what I was really facing. This wasn't just some cave monster, it was the monastery's final guardian, powered by the souls of everyone it had killed over the centuries. The monks had created it somehow, bound it to protect their bone church from intruders. And every person it killed made it stronger. The creature took a step toward me, and I saw that its feet weren't paws but human hands, scaled up to enormous size. Hands that could crush a skull like an egg or tear through solid rock. "You will make a fine addition," it said. "Strong bones, brave heart. I will keep you alive for days while I work." I backed against the bone barrier, feeling dried ribs crack under the pressure. "Why?" I asked, stalling for time while I looked for any kind of advantage. "Why do you do this?" "Because they made me to." The creature's voice was full of old rage. Russian monks, afraid their sacred bones would be disturbed. They bound bare spirit to human souls, created guardian that could not die, could not leave, could not rest. For 200 years I have protected this place. 200 years of hunger and duty and hate. I could hear the loneliness in that terrible voice, the exhaustion of an existence that had gone on too long, but I could also hear the hunger, the need to feed, that drove it to kill anyone who entered its domain. "Then let's end it," I said, and fired the flare gun directly into its face. The creature roared and staggered backward, clawing at the burning phosphorus that clung to its fur. I used those few seconds to pull out the explosive charges I carried for emergency rock removal, small shaped charges designed to clear cave-ins. The creature's roar turned into words. You cannot kill what is already dead. I am eternal. I am necessary. But it was wrong about one thing. I'd seen enough death in my 17 years to know the difference between something that couldn't die and something that just didn't want to. I attached charges to the chamber walls while the creature thrashed in the flare's chemical fire. The monastery had built this place to last forever, but they'd built it from limestone and prayer. I had shaped charges and 17 years of knowing exactly where to hit a cave system to bring it down. Guardian, I shouted over its roars of pain. Your watch is over. I triggered the charges and dove for the bone barrier as the chamber ceiling came down in a thunderous avalanche of stone and dust. The creature tried to phase through the falling rock, but there was too much of it coming too fast. Tons of limestone crashed down, pinning its massive form under crushing weight. The skulls embedded in its hide screamed as the stones found them, ancient voices finally able to express their pain. But it wasn't dead. Things like that don't die easy. It took me 6 hours to dig my way out of the collapsed chamber, following a narrow air pocket that led to a passage I hadn't seen before. My hands were bloody and my ribs ached from where a falling rock had caught me, but I was alive and moving. The creature was trapped under the rockfall, but I could hear it moving down there, slowly working its way free, shifting stones that should have been too heavy for anything to move. I had maybe a day before it broke loose, and I was still lost in a cave system that went on for miles. That's when the hunger hit me. I'd been underground for 14 hours with nothing but emergency rations, and the adrenaline crash left me weak and shaking. But there was food available, if I could stomach it. The creature's blood was pooled in cracks between the fallen stones, black and thick as motor oil. It smelled like rotten meat, but it smelled like protein too. Like survival. I told myself I was just doing what it took to live long enough to get rescued. I told myself it was just blood, just calories to keep me moving. I told myself a lot of things while I cupped that foul liquid in my hands and drank it down. It tasted like metal and graves, but it filled the empty space in my belly. And it did something else too, something I didn't understand until later. It changed me. They found me 6 days later, when the ice storm finally broke and the rescue helicopters could fly. I was sitting by the main cave entrance, alive but different. Changed in ways that didn't show on the surface, but went all the way down to my bones. The official report said I'd suffered severe dehydration and exposure, with possible psychological trauma from my time underground. They said the missing cavers had died in a collapse, their bodies too buried under tons of rock to recover safely. They said I was lucky to be alive. They were wrong about the lucky part. The creature's blood had done something to me down there in the dark. I could feel it working in my system, changing my chemistry cell by cell. My senses got sharper. I could smell fear on people from across a room, hear heartbeats through thick walls. My strength doubled, then tripled. And when I was really angry, I could feel something else stirring under my skin, something with claws and hunger. But the worst part was the voices. All the skulls that had been embedded in the creature's hide, they came with me when I drank its blood. Dr. Chen, Tommy, Martinez, and dozens of others going back decades. They lived in my head now, whispering their memories and fears and final moments. Sometimes they tried to take control, to use my body to finish things they'd left undone. I learned to manage it, learned to push their voices down deep where they couldn't interfere with my daily life. But they were always there, a chorus of the dead reminding me what I'd become. The divorce papers got served 3 weeks after I got out of the hospital. My husband took one look at me and knew something fundamental had changed. Smart man, for a drunk with anger issues. He moved out the next day and never asked for an explanation. I went back to work after a month of medical leave. Same job, same caves, same people to rescue. But now I could smell the cave systems from miles away, feel the presence of anyone lost underground like they were sending out radio signals. I got better at my job. A lot better. Maybe too good. Because 12 people have gone into Cathedral Cave since my rescue, and none of them have come out. Cavers who ignored the warning signs. Thrill seekers looking for an adventure. Teenagers on dares. They all went down into that limestone maze looking for excitement, and they found something else waiting for them. They found me. The creature was right about one thing. The monastery needed a guardian. The bone church needed protection from those who would disturb the eternal rest. And when the old guardian died under all that falling rock, something new had to take its place. Something that looked human enough to walk among people, but knew the taste of blood and the weight of duty. Something that could hunt in the dark spaces under the earth and arrange the bones of the disrespectful in patterns that pleased ancient spirits. I still live in the same house, still work the same job. But my real work begins when the sun goes down and the curious ones come looking for thrills in places they shouldn't go. I hunt them through passages they'll never see coming, in caves that rearrange themselves to trap the unwary. And when I catch them, I remember what the old guardian told me about keeping people alive for days while I work. About the art of bone arrangement and the satisfaction of adding to a collection that spans centuries. The voices in my head approve. Dr. Chen whispers instructions about anatomy. Tommy helps me choose the best locations for new additions to the bone church. Martinez hums old songs while I work, keeping me company in the eternal darkness. Sometimes I wonder if there was another way. If I could have resisted the change, fought off what the creature's blood did to me. But when I look at the bone church now, see how beautiful it's become with my recent additions, I know this is what I was meant for. My name is Rebecca Ironheart, and I've spent 17 years pulling people out of places they shouldn't have gone. Now I make sure they stay there forever. The cave system runs deep under Glacier Bay National Park, and there are always new passages opening after earthquakes and ice melts. Always new places for the curious to explore, new chambers for the foolish to get lost in. And I'll be waiting in the dark, keeping watch over the sacred dead, adding to the collection one skull at a time. Some places are graveyards for a reason. My name is Jonathan Nightshade, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. Most of that time, I've helped other rangers deal with the mental strain of working in isolated places. You see, I used to be a military psychiatrist during the Korean War. I've seen what fear and isolation can do to a person's mind. I thought I understood madness. I thought it always had medical explanations, not supernatural ones. I was wrong. It was June 1979 when I got the call to go to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in northern Alaska. A research station studying the effects of the midnight sun had gone silent for 3 days. The last radio message was garbled and strange. Something about the light never stops, and they're in the shadows. The midnight sun is a real thing up there. For 65 days straight, the sun never sets. It just circles the sky, bathing everything in constant, harsh daylight, no darkness, no relief. Just endless, blazing light that drives men mad. I should know about madness. My son killed himself 2 years ago. Since then, I've been barely holding myself together with prescription pills I'm not supposed to have. But I hide it well. That's what I do. I help others while falling apart inside. The helicopter dropped me at the research station on a Tuesday morning, though morning and evening meant nothing in that place. The sun hung low and bright, casting everything in an orange glow that hurt your eyes. The pilot looked nervous. "You sure you want me to leave you here, Doc?" he asked. "This place gives me the creeps." I looked at the small cluster of buildings sitting alone on the endless tundra. No trees, no hills, just flat land stretching to the horizon in every direction. The research station looked tiny and fragile against all that emptiness. "I'll be fine," I told him. "Come back in 3 days." The helicopter flew away, leaving me in silence so complete it made my ears ring. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl, laughter coming from inside the main building. High-pitched, hysterical laughter that went on and on. I walked to the front door and knocked. The laughter stopped instantly. "Hello?" I called. "I'm Dr. Nightshade from the Park Service. I'm here to check on everyone." No answer. I tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the building was too warm and smelled like sweat and something else, something rotten. The windows were covered with sheets and blankets, blocking out the endless sunlight. In the dim artificial light, I could see overturned furniture and papers scattered everywhere. "Is anyone here?" I called again. That's when I saw him. A man in a dirty lab coat sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't looking at anything. His lips moved constantly, but no sound came out. "Sir?" I approached slowly. "Are you all right?" He looked up at me then, and I'll never forget his face. His pupils were tiny pinpricks, and his skin was pale as paper. When he smiled, I saw he'd bitten his tongue so badly it was black with dried blood. "The light," he whispered. "The light brings them. They live in our shadows, even when there shouldn't be any shadows at all." I knelt beside him. "What's your name?" "Dr. Peterson. I study sleep, but nobody sleeps here anymore. Can't sleep when they're watching." He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You have to help us. We've been awake for 40 days. 40 days. And they come when we close our eyes." "Who comes?" But before he could answer, I heard footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth across the ceiling. Then another sound, someone crying softly. I left Dr. Peterson and went upstairs. The crying was coming from behind a closed door. I knocked gently. "Hello, I'm here to help." The crying stopped. After a moment, a woman's voice answered, "Are you real?" "Yes, I'm real. I'm Dr. Nightshade. Can you open the door?" "How do I know you're not one of them? They can look like anyone now." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who are they?" "The light beings. They came when the sun stopped setting. First we thought it was just sleep deprivation making us see things, but then Dr. Morrison saw them clearly. He tried to tell us, but they killed him for it." "Someone killed Dr. Morrison?" "Not someone, something. Come see." The door opened. A young woman with tangled hair and hollow eyes peered out at me. She was wearing a lab coat stained with something dark. "I'm Sarah," she said. "I was studying the psychological effects of constant daylight on human subjects. But we became the subjects instead." She led me down the hall to another room. The door was off its hinges. Inside, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Dr. Morrison, or what was left of him, was sitting at a desk. His body was there, but something was terribly wrong. His skin was translucent, like paper. I could see right through him to the chair behind, and his eyes were gone. Just empty sockets that somehow still seemed to be looking at me. "The light beings drained him," Sarah whispered. "They fed on his mind first, then his body. But the worst part is, he's still alive in there somewhere. Sometimes he tries to talk, as if he'd heard her." The thing that had been Dr. Morrison turned its hollow eye sockets toward us. Its mouth opened, and a sound came out like wind through dry leaves. "Run," it whispered. "They're coming back." I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her away from the room. My heart was pounding, but my medical training kicked in. There had to be a rational explanation. Extreme sleep deprivation could cause vivid hallucinations. Shared psychotic episodes weren't unheard of in isolated groups. But that thing sitting at the desk, I could smell it. Death and something else. Something like ozone after a lightning strike. "How many of you are left?" I asked Sarah as we went back downstairs. 5, maybe 6 if you count Morrison, but..." She shuddered. "There were 12 of us when this started." In the main room, I found Dr. Peterson exactly where I'd left him, still rocking and mumbling. Sarah led me to a kitchen where 2 more researchers sat at a table. They looked up when we entered, and I saw the same hollow, terrified expression in their eyes. "This is Tom and Jessica," Sarah said. "They're married. They've been holding hands for 3 days straight." Tom was a big man with a thick beard, but his hands shook like a child's. Jessica was small and pale, with dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked like bruises. "You're the doctor they sent?" Tom asked. His voice was hoarse, probably from not drinking enough water. "You need to get us out of here. Something's hunting us." "Tell me exactly what you think you've seen," I said, sitting down across from them. I pulled out my notepad, trying to act professional and calm. Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Think we've seen?" "Doctor, 3 days ago, I watched my colleague Jim walk outside for a smoke break. Something made of pure light grabbed him and lifted him 50 feet in the air. Then it opened him up like a flower and drank what poured out." Shared hallucinations are common in cases of severe sleep deprivation, I explained gently. "When did you last sleep?" "Sleep?" Tom stared at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. How can we sleep when they come for us in the dark? We turned off all the lights that first night, thought maybe some darkness would help us rest. But that's when we first saw them. Them? The light beings, Sarah said. They're made of pure energy, but they cast shadows even in the brightest light, impossible shadows that move on their own. I looked around the room. Every window was covered, but thin streams of sunlight leaked through gaps in the makeshift curtains. And there, on the wall behind Tom and Jessica, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Their shadows on the wall were wrong. They were holding hands, but their shadows seemed to be reaching for each other's throats. I blinked hard and looked again. Just normal shadows now. Sleep deprivation affects everyone, I told myself. Even me. Where are the others? I asked. The three researchers exchanged glances. David's upstairs, Sarah said quietly. He won't come down anymore. He says the light beings can't reach him on the second floor, but I think he's getting worse. And Frank? Frank went outside yesterday morning, Tom said. Said he was going to end this. We haven't seen him since. I stood up. I need to check on David. Can you show me where he is? Sarah nodded reluctantly. As we headed for the stairs, I heard Dr. Peterson start laughing again. That same high-pitched, hysterical sound that had greeted me when I arrived. The second floor was darker than the main level. Most of the windows up here were completely blocked. Sarah led me to a door at the end of the hall. I could hear someone moving around inside, but also a strange scraping sound. David? Sarah called softly. The doctor's here to see you. The scraping stopped. Is he real? David's voice was muffled by the door. Yes, he's real, doctor. Nightshade from the Park Service. Make him prove it. They can look like anyone now. I stepped closer to the door. David, I'm Dr. Jonathan Nightshade. I've been a ranger for 21 years. I'm here because your research station stopped communicating 3 days ago. The last message mentioned problems with the light. There was a long pause. Then the door opened just a crack, and one bloodshot eye peered out at me. You look real, David said, but so did Frank when he came back yesterday, right before he tried to kill Tom. Frank came back? Sarah grabbed my arm. That's impossible. Frank's been missing for 2 days. The door opened wider. David was a thin man in his 30s, but he looked like he'd aged 20 years. His hands were covered in blood, and I could see scratch marks all over his arms. Frank came back, but it wasn't Frank, David said. It looked like him, talked like him. But when Tom hugged him, I saw the truth. Frank's shadow was wrong. It had too many arms, and they were reaching out to grab Tom's head. I looked at David's hands. What happened to you? I've been scratching at my skin, he said matter-of-factly. Trying to let the light out. They put light under my skin while I was sleeping. I can feel it moving around in there. Behind me, Sarah made a small choking sound. David, I said carefully, you need medical attention. Let me look at those cuts. No, he slammed the door shut. You can't touch me. If you touch me, they'll know you're here. I heard him moving away from the door, and that scraping sound started again. He's been clawing at the walls, Sarah whispered, trying to dig his way out. But there's nowhere to go. We're 500 miles from the nearest town. As we walked back downstairs, I tried to process what I was seeing. 5 researchers showing signs of extreme psychotic breakdown, shared delusions about supernatural entities. But there were things that didn't fit the pattern of group psychosis. Like Morrison's body, I was a psychiatrist, not a medical doctor, but I'd seen enough death to know what a corpse looked like. Morrison was dead, but his body wasn't decomposing normally. And that translucent skin. Sarah, I said as we reached the main floor, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have any of you been taking drugs, experimental medications, anything that might cause hallucinations? She stopped walking and turned to face me. Dr. Nightshade, do you think we're all crazy? I looked into her eyes. Exhausted, terrified, but not insane. Not completely. I think you've all been under tremendous stress, I said. Isolation, constant daylight, sleep deprivation. These things can cause the mind to play tricks. Then explain this, she said. She walked to one of the covered windows and pulled back the blanket. Harsh sunlight flooded the room, making me squint. But there, pressed against the glass from outside, was a handprint. A human handprint. That appeared yesterday, Sarah said, while we were all inside. No one went outside. No one could have made that mark. I stepped closer to examine it. The print was on the outside of the glass, definitely, but there was something wrong with it. The fingers were too long, and there seemed to be too many of them. As I stared at the handprint, something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned quickly, but saw only our shadows on the wall. Except, my shadow was wrong. While I was turned toward the window, my shadow was facing the opposite direction, looking straight at Sarah. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing there but Sarah's concerned face. "Doctor, are you all right?" I looked back at the wall. All the shadows were normal now. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired from the flight." But I wasn't fine. Something was very wrong in this place. And it wasn't just sleep deprivation. From outside, carried on the wind, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. Someone was whistling a tune I recognized, a lullaby my son used to hum. But my son was dead, and there was no one outside. The whistling stopped as suddenly as it had started. Sarah and I stood frozen by the window, listening to the silence. Then Tom's voice came from the kitchen, tight with panic. "Sarah, get away from that window, they're back." We hurried to the kitchen, where Tom and Jessica were pressed against the far wall, staring at something I couldn't see. "Doctor." Peterson had stopped rocking and was now standing perfectly still, his head tilted like he was listening to something. "What's happening?" I asked. "Look at the shadows," Jessica whispered. "Look at the shadows on the floor." I looked down. The kitchen had one small window that wasn't completely covered, allowing a narrow beam of sunlight to fall across the linoleum floor. In that beam of light, I saw 5 distinct shadows. But there were only 4 of us in the room. The 5th shadow was tall and thin, with arms that seemed too long and moved independently of any body I could see. As I watched, it reached toward Jessica's shadow. "Don't let it touch you." Tom pulled Jessica away from the light. "When the shadows touch, they drain you." I rubbed my eyes hard, then looked again. 4 shadows now. 4 people, everything normal. "Mass hallucinations," I muttered, but my voice shook. "Severe sleep deprivation can cause." "Doctor." Dr. Peterson's voice cut through my explanation. He was looking directly at me, his eyes more focused than they'd been since I arrived. "How long since you've seen your son?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "What did you say?" "Your son. The boy who whistles lullabies. How long since you've seen him?" I staggered backward. I'd never mentioned my son to anyone here, never told them about his death or the lullabies he used to hum. "You're tired," Peterson continued in that same calm voice. "You take pills to sleep, but they don't help anymore. The guilt follows you into your dreams. You couldn't save him, could you, doctor?" "Stop." My hands were shaking now. "Stop talking." "But he's here now," Peterson said, and smiled with his bloody mouth. "He came with the light beings. They brought him back for you." From upstairs came a sound that nearly drove me to my knees. A young voice, humming a lullaby. The same tune I'd heard whistled outside. It was my son's voice. "Tommy?" I whispered. "Dad?" The voice came from the top of the stairs. "Dad, I'm scared. Why won't you come help me?" I started toward the stairs, but Sarah grabbed my arm. "Don't," she said urgently. "It's not real. They use our memories against us. They dig into our minds and pull out what hurts us most." But the voice came again, so exactly like Tommy's that my heart broke all over again. "Dad, please, they're hurting me." I pulled away from Sarah and ran for the stairs. Behind me, I heard Tom shout a warning, but I didn't care. If there was even a chance. The second floor was darker than before. All the windows had been covered while I was downstairs. I could barely see, but I followed the sound of crying to the room at the end of the hall. "Tommy?" I called softly. "Is that really you?" "Dad." The voice was coming from David's room, the one with the scratched-up walls. "Help me, the light man is hurting me." I reached for the door handle, but stopped when I heard David's voice from inside the same room. "Let go of me," David screamed. "I won't tell him, I won't bring him in here." 2 voices, from the same room. One was my dead son, the other was David. But David had been alone when I left him. I pressed my ear to the door. David was sobbing now. "Please," he begged. "Don't make me do this. Don't make me hurt him too." "David," I called, "are you all right?" The crying stopped instantly, both voices, David's and Tommy's. "Dr. Nightshade?" David's voice was different now, calmer. "Could you come in here, please? I need to show you something important." Something was wrong. Very wrong. David had been terrified earlier, refusing to let me near him. Now he sounded almost eager. "What do you want to show me, David?" "The truth about your son," he said. "About why he really died." My hand was on the door handle before I could stop myself. I had to know. Even if it was a hallucination, even if it destroyed me, I had to know. I opened the door. The room was pitch black except for one impossible thing. David was sitting in the center of the floor, but he was glowing. Not like a light bulb, like he was made of light himself. His skin was translucent, just like Morrison's had been, but David was still alive. His eyes were gone, replaced by swirling pools of white light. And beside him, flickering like a candle flame, was Tommy. My son looked exactly as he had 2 years ago. 12 years old, with messy brown hair and the gap between his front teeth. But his eyes were the same swirling pools of light as David's. "Hello, Dad," Tommy said. "I've missed you so much." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "I know you blame yourself," Tommy continued, stepping closer. "But it wasn't your fault. I was sick, Dad, sick in my head, just like these people are sick." "You're not real," I whispered. "I'm real enough," Tommy said, and his voice was exactly right. Every inflection, every little quirk of speech, the light beings brought me back. "They can do that, Dad. They can undo death itself." Behind Tommy, David laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "They told me how to bring him back for you," David said. "All you have to do is let them in, let them touch your shadow, then we can all be together forever." I looked at the floor and saw my shadow stretching across the room. But now there were other shadows moving toward it. Impossible shadows with too many arms, reaching out from everywhere at once. "Don't let them touch you." Sarah's voice came from the doorway behind me. "It's not really your son, it's them. They're wearing his face." I spun around. Sarah was silhouetted in the doorway, but her shadow on the wall was completely wrong. It had wings. Huge, dark wings that filled the entire wall. "Sarah?" She looked down at her own shadow and screamed, "They're in me too," she cried. "Oh God, they're in all." That's when I understood. The light beings weren't just hunting us, they were inside us, using our own shadows as doorways into our minds. The thing wearing Tommy's face smiled wider. "Smart man," it said, "but too late. We've been feeding on you since the moment you arrived. Every fear, every guilt, every broken memory. Delicious." I looked at my hands. They were starting to become translucent, just like Morrison's and David's. "No," I said. "No, this isn't real. Mass hysteria, group psychosis. There's a medical explanation. Is there?" The Tommy thing tilted its head. "Then explain this." The room filled with blinding light. Not sunlight, something else. Something that burned without heat and illuminated without casting shadows. In that impossible light, I saw the truth. David wasn't sitting on the floor. He was floating 3 feet in the air, his body completely hollow like an empty shell. The thing I thought was Tommy wasn't my son, it was a writhing mass of pure energy wearing his face like a mask, and everywhere I looked, I saw them. Light beings. Dozens of them, feeding on the shadows of the research team. Morrison wasn't dead, he was being drained slowly, kept alive so they could savor his terror. The beings weren't just in this room, they were throughout the entire building. In the walls, in the air, in our shadows. They'd been feeding on the research team for weeks, growing stronger with each mind they consumed. "Your turn, Doctor," the Tommy thing said. "Let us in, and the pain will stop. Let us in, and you can see your son again, really see him." I felt something cold touch my shadow on the floor. Immediately, memories started flooding my mind. But they weren't my memories, they were Tommy's. His last days, his depression, his final, desperate act. And underneath those memories, I felt something else. Hunger. Ancient, bottomless hunger for human consciousness. For the light that lives behind our eyes. They weren't here to kill us, they were here to farm us. The false memories hit me like a sledgehammer. I saw Tommy's last day through his eyes, felt his despair and hopelessness as if they were my own. But underneath it all, I sensed the light being's satisfaction. They were feeding on my grief, growing stronger with every tear. "Stop!" I shouted, stumbling backward out of David's room. "This isn't real." But Sarah grabbed my arm, and when I looked at her face, her eyes were the same swirling pools of light as David's. "It is real, Doctor," she said in a voice that wasn't quite her own. "We're all real now. We're all part of them." I ran for the stairs, but Tom was waiting at the bottom. His skin was starting to turn translucent too, and when he smiled, I could see light pulsing underneath like a heartbeat. "There's nowhere to run," he said. "We've been calling to them for weeks. Every time we felt fear, every time we despaired, we sent out signals, and they came." I pushed past him into the main room. Dr. Peterson was gone, but I could hear his laughter echoing from somewhere inside the walls. Jessica sat in the corner, staring at her hands as they slowly became see-through. "The midnight sun," she said without looking up. 65 days of constant light. It weakens the barrier between dimensions, makes it easier for them to cross over. I ran to the radio equipment, desperate to call for help. But when I grabbed the microphone, I heard my own voice coming through the speaker. "Help us," my voice said. "Please send someone. The light beings are here." But I hadn't spoken into the microphone. I was hearing a message I would send tomorrow, or maybe yesterday. Time didn't work right anymore. "They exist outside of linear time," Jessica explained, as if reading my thoughts. "Past, present, future. It's all the same to them. They've already won, Doctor. They won the moment the midnight sun started." I dropped the microphone and ran for the door. Outside, the endless Arctic sun blazed down on the tundra. Everything was too bright, too sharp, like an overexposed photograph. And everywhere I looked, I saw movement in my peripheral vision, things that weren't there when I turned to look directly. I started running across the tundra, away from the research station, but after what felt like hours, I looked back and saw the buildings were still the same distance away. I wasn't moving. The landscape itself was keeping me trapped. That's when I heard the laughter. It was coming from everywhere at once. The sky, the ground, the wind itself. Not human laughter. Something else. Something vast and hungry and utterly alien. "You can't escape," the laughter seemed to say. "We are the light itself." I fell to my knees on the frozen ground. They were right. There was no darkness here. No shadows to hide in. No escape from the endless, blazing light that carried the beings between and worlds. But as I knelt there, defeated, I remembered something from my military training. Sometimes, when you can't escape the enemy, you have to destroy what they want. The light beings weren't just feeding on us. They were using us as anchors, holding the dimensional barrier open so more of their kind could cross over. If they spread beyond this research station, they would eventually consume the consciousness of every living thing on Earth. I had to stop them, even if it meant destroying myself and everyone else in the process. I ran back to the research station. Tom was waiting in the doorway, but his face was wrong now. Too many teeth, and his eyes had divided into compound shapes like an insect's. "Going somewhere, Doctor?" he asked. "I'm going to kill you," I said. "All of you." Tom laughed. "You can't kill light itself." "No," I said, pulling out my service pistol, "but I can kill what's carrying it." I shot Tom in the chest. He fell backward, but no, blood came out. Instead, pure light poured from the wound, so bright it hurt to look at. The light formed shapes in the air, writhing, tentacled things that reached for me with grasping appendages. I ran past his body into the building. Jessica was still sitting in the corner, but now she was completely transparent. I could see right through her to the wall behind. "They're using our bodies as vessels," she said in a voice like wind chimes. "Hollow us out and fill us with their essence. Soon, there will be nothing left of who we were." I found what I was looking for in the building's basement. The main electrical panel and the backup generator. If I could cut all power to the station and plunge it into complete darkness, maybe I could disrupt the being's manifestation. As I worked to disconnect the power cables, I heard footsteps on the floor above. All of them were moving now. The possessed research team, shambling around like zombies made of light. They knew what I was trying to do. Dr. Nightshade. Sarah's voice drifted down from upstairs. But it wasn't just Sarah anymore. It was a chorus of voices, all the people the beings had consumed over the years. You're only delaying the inevitable. We are eternal. We are infinite. I ripped the main power line out of the panel. The building's lights flickered and died, but it wasn't enough. Sunlight still streamed through every crack and gap in the covered windows. The beings were still there, still feeding. That's when I remembered the propane tanks behind the building. The researchers had been using them to heat the station. If I could create an explosion big enough, I ran outside and found the tanks. As I worked to disconnect the safety valves, I felt something cold touch the back of my neck. "Dad?" Tommy's voice, right behind me. "What are you doing?" I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at him again, I would lose my resolve. "I'm saving the world, Tommy," I said. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you when it mattered." "You can save me now," the thing wearing my son's voice said. "Join us. Become like us. Then we can be together forever." I finished with the gas valves and pulled out my lighter. "Forever is too long," I said. I lit the flame and threw it toward the leaking propane. The explosion knocked me 50 feet through the air. When I hit the ground, everything went white. But it wasn't the white of unconsciousness. It was the white of pure, destroying light. The light beings shrieked as the explosion tore through their dimensional anchor point. For a moment, reality itself seemed to crack like glass. Then darkness, blessed, absolute darkness, as the flames consumed everything and smoke blocked out the midnight sun. In that darkness, I heard them screaming, not with voices, but with something deeper. The sound of ancient, impossible hunger being denied. The sound of creatures of pure light being forced back into whatever hell they came from. The last thing I remember was lying in the snow, watching the research station burn against the endless Arctic sky. And for the first time in 65 days, there were real shadows. The shadows of a man lying alone in the snow, watching his world burn. I had won, but the victory felt hollow because I finally understood the truth. The light beings hadn't just been feeding on our fears and memories, they had been showing us the future. A future where they would return, stronger than ever, when the next midnight sun began. They found me 3 days later, when the helicopter came back. I was half frozen and completely mad, babbling about light beings and dimensional barriers. The research station was a pile of ash and melted metal. They said I was the only survivor of a tragic gas leak explosion. I never told them the truth. They put me in a psychiatric hospital in Anchorage, where I spent the next 6 months. The doctors said I was suffering from severe PTSD and survivor's guilt. They gave me medications and therapy sessions. They were very kind and very thorough. But they didn't understand that I wasn't crazy. I was changed. The light beings had touched me before I destroyed their anchor point. They had been inside my mind, feeding on my memories, learning about our world. And when they were forced back to their dimension, they left something behind. I can see them now. Not clearly, not all the time. But I catch glimpses. Shadows that move wrong. Light that bends in impossible ways. They're still here, waiting in the spaces between dimensions, planning their return. The doctors released me after a year. I went back to work as a park ranger, but I requested a transfer to the lower 48, somewhere warm, where the sun sets every night and the darkness provides refuge from the endless light. I keep track of the calendar now, June 21st to August 12th. Those are the dangerous dates in the Mies Arctic. 65 days when the midnight sun creates a doorway between worlds. I write letters to the Wildlife Service every year, warning them not to send anyone to the far north during those months. They think I'm a harmless old man with PTSD. They file my letters and forget about them, but I know the truth. The light beings are patient. They can wait decades, centuries if necessary. They exist outside of time itself. Eventually, someone else will build another research station in the Arctic. Someone else will study the midnight sun. And when that happens, the beings will return. I see Tommy sometimes, in reflections and peripheral vision. Not the false thing the light beings created, but my real son. He forgives me for not saving him the first time. He's proud that I saved everyone else, but he's also afraid, because he knows, just like I do, that the next midnight sun is coming. And when it arrives, the light beings will be ready. I'm 67 years old. Now, my hair is completely white, and my hands shake from old age and too many pills. But I still watch the northern skies every summer, looking for signs that they're trying to cross over again. Last week, I got a call from a research team planning to study aurora activity in northern Alaska. They want to establish a station right where the old one burned down. They asked if I had any advice about working in the Arctic during summer. I told them to wait until winter, work in the darkness, when the aurora lights dance across the sky. Never, ever work during the midnight sun. They laughed and said they couldn't study summer aurora phenomena in the winter. I hung up the phone and started packing my bags. I'm going back to Alaska. One last time. I'm too old to fight them if they return. But maybe I can warn the new researchers. Maybe I can convince them to leave before the midnight sun begins. Or maybe I'll just sit in the darkness and wait for the light beings to finish what they started. Either way, I'll be ready. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to know the truth about what lives in the light between worlds. Someone has to stand guard during the midnight sun. Even if that someone is a crazy old man who sees monsters in the shadows. Even if no one believes him. The light beings are coming back. And when they do, I'll be waiting. After all, I'm Jonathan Nightshade. I've been a park ranger for 30 years now. And I know that some kinds of madness are just the truth wearing a different face. The midnight sun rises again in 6 months. I hope I'm wrong about what's coming, but I know I'm not.